Hi, everybody. My name is Andrea Pocket, and I am president and co-founder of the Stigma-Free Mental Health Society. I am so excited to have you here today for another one of our amazing podcasts related to rural mental wellness. And so today we have an amazing guest, which I'm super excited about. Merle, do you want to say a quick hello?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Merle Massie. I'm the executive director of the Do More Agriculture Foundation.
Awesome. Love it. Okay. So, everybody, first and foremost, we host these podcasts to bring on experts. We have two areas to our podcast. We have Stigma Free, which is more general, and then we focus on rural and remote and agricultural communities, which is another focus for Stigma Free. And so, for those of you who are tuning in, please go to stigmafreementalhealth.com after the fact, check out our website. We will talk with Merle here. We'll get all of her information for her organization a little later on. And just really excited to have everybody here. If you are watching, please hit share. And if you're watching this after the fact, please do the same if you don't mind. All right, perfect. So, Merle, I think a good way to start is I'm going to share your bio. Sound good?
Excellent.
Okay. So Merle Massie is a farmer, author, the executive director of the Do More Agricultural Foundation, championing mental health in Canadian agricultural. Merle values energy, creativity, and curiosity and loves collaborating. And a fun fact is Merle raided her farm rockpiles and built a meditation labyrinth on her farm. So we'll have to talk about that as well. But first and foremost, let's get to know you a little bit, Merle. I was wondering if you could first and foremost tell me about the first time that you understood that people can have a mental illness as something different than a physical illness.
Oh, that's a great question. This is something that I'm starting to ask other people as well. We have all of this background here in Canada, right? About health being a public right. If you're feeling ill for any reason, you go to the doctor, right, and they help you out. And yet, growing up as I did in the 1970s, it was very clear to me that there were some aspects of health that were more talked about and more sort of socially acceptable, and other aspects of health that were not particularly socially acceptable to talk about. And when I first started realizing that there was a difference between mental health and physical health, was I was probably about 10 or 11, and it's when one of my brothers, we realized that he actually walked with a particular mental illness. We didn't have a name for it until later, but we knew that there was something that needed some extra help and support. He would be sometimes really, really high and up and speaking really, really fast and so charismatic, right? You couldn't ever say no to him. He was just a force of nature. And then there were other times when there would be days when he wouldn't talk, or he'd be in a corner reading, right? And just very, very quiet. And so realizing that there's those ups and downs, right? And so it was only later that we realized that what was happening with him is that he was walking with bipolar disorder. And so there's a whole separate story out of that, but it was interesting as that young kid, knowing that why is it okay to talk about when somebody broke their leg or they were in a car accident, and yet if there's something going on with how they were feeling, that this was something that was only done behind your hand and whispered in the corners. And so it was my first realization that there not only were there differences between mental and physical health, but there were differences socially in what you were allowed to share and what you were allowed to talk about. And I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about that and thinking about why that matters.
Yeah, 100%. Like when I was growing up as well, my mother was diagnosed bipolar disorder, and I actually have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder since I was 25. And growing up, it's so hush hush, and just people don't talk about it, and that's just an inherent stigma. Especially when I was growing up as a young child in the 1980s. So, have you seen a big what kind of change have you seen in this over the years? Perhaps for families, yourself, or your own family?
Well, certainly the wording, right? Like the word bipolar disorder, I'm not sure that it actually existed in the 1970s. By the time the 1990s came along, then it was starting to become more common, and there was a better understanding that there was treatment available, right? Whether it was lithium, whether it was other forms of treatment, and that there was hope and there were options, and that this was something that was manageable, right? Something that you could live a really good, healthy life and manage, just like you do and manage, a heart disease or diabetes, or take your insulin every day, right? And so there was, I think, from the 90s there was sort of an increase in understanding along with that, and certainly since the advent of the internet, right? So I can remember when I first entered university in 1989, there were not computer rooms connected to the internet. But by the time the mid 90s came along and I started doing my master's, I can remember getting my first email, and setting up our first web page. All of a sudden, access to that information just became, more and more. And I think that access to information has helped to create that space for people to access what they need to know. So those words were being used. So in my lifetime, not only has it come out of the shadows, but it is much, much more likely that people are aware of it, more willing to talk about it, more willing to seek treatment. And now we're still working on the whether or not it's still sort of that hushed behind the hands conversation, or if people treat a mental illness the same way they would a physical illness, make the adjustments for somebody who has a heart condition or diabetes, in the workplace, just as you would someone who has depression or anxiety or something like that. So there's still a bit of a difference, but I think it's certainly less and certainly more talked about.
Yeah. So let's get into farming and mental health. So why is it that farming is unique when it comes to mental health, in your opinion?
Oh, that is a great question. And there's actually a lot of reasons for that, and a lot of a great research that's been done. So the Canadian Centre for Rural and Agricultural Health at the University of Saskatchewan was originally created as the Centre for Agricultural Medicine back in 1986. And the reason for that is that the risks associated with being connected to agriculture and conducting agriculture and being a producer and working on a farm, the health related risks are higher and they're different. And so they need to be actually looked at within the farm context and studied and understood within the farm context, because they are different. They're not the same as somebody who's, sitting in an office in downtown Saskatoon, that kind of thing. So, or working as a teacher, working as a nurse. Every just to be clear, every place does have their risks, and I totally understand that. Farm risks are different, and they do require that sort of concerted look. And one of the pieces that became really clear really quick is that farm stress actually has a huge impact on how people manage their farms, how people are able to manage their farms, and it has an impact both on their physical health and on their mental health. And then you combine that with the agriculture has its own culture, right? It's agriculture, and the culture piece has a huge impact. The culture of agriculture, and it's embedded within that rural life. And we'll get to that too, but just specific within agriculture, there's very much a dominant culture of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? You're having a bad day, just put your head down and get through it. Or you don't have time to be sick. It's spring seeding, it's haying season, it's harvest. You've got crops out in the field and it's going to rain next week. So, you're going, 16, 18, 20 hours just to try and get ahead so that you can get your crops off in good condition, because that matters, right? Like you can't have the rain coming down on the crops, because then your crops will be downgraded from number 1 grade to number 2 or number 3 grade. And that has an impact on how much money you have coming into your farm to pay your bills, right? So that seasonal stress is a huge thing in farming, and you don't necessarily see it in any other industry to that level. And so it's that seasonal stress and that financial stress that all pushes together. And so within that, if somebody does have an illness that requires treatment,
Mm.
Whether or not they're able to take the time off, whether or not their culture, which is, that pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just push your way through it, whether that culture, how far that's embedded inside you, whether that will even allow you to go and get help, whether you even recognize the symptoms, that's something else. Because if we didn't talk about mental health and mental illness back in the 70s and 80s, when, the average age of farmers in Canada is 57 years old. So that's my age plus a few years, right? And so they weren't taught what to look for. They weren't taught. There was no there was nothing in the health section of what we took, going through kindergarten to grade 12 that really talked about mental health. And so people to even recognize what's going on. And then the third level to all of this is that farms are in rural communities, and rural communities can be a very long way away from help, right? So physically getting in the vehicle and driving to your nearest doctor's office, that could be anywhere from, if you're lucky, 20 minutes to get to the nearest town that has a hospital, that has a doctor, or, up to 2, 3, 4 hours away, right? So just to get to the doctor, if you've decided that, I'm in a place that I actually need help for this, to get to the doctor can be, so that rural and remote issue of access, and that's still just a regular doctor, let alone something like a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist, right, who's a specialist, a medical specialist in mental health. Specialists are usually congregated only in big cities, right? So they're really hard to get to. Even therapists, right? So having therapists based in rural communities is one aspect, and then a therapist based in rural communities who understand farming, because we hear the odd really, really tough story of a farmer who has decided, I could use a little bit of extra help, and they either call a call line, and there are wonderful call lines, but perhaps they're just unlucky and they happen to get someone on the other end of the call line who's very empathetic and listens to their story, but doesn't really understand farming, and maybe gives them a piece of advice, something like, well, just go away for the weekend and come back on Monday and see how you feel. And they've got 100 cows in their milking parlor, right? Like, so that, the pieces of advice sometimes don't quite fit. So there's so many aspects to this. Just thinking through from a farm, when you are a farmer, let's say that you're a primary producer or you're a member of a farm family, and you're out there and you're doing that work in that seasonal pressure, cauldron, right? There's also things around isolation, right? You might be spending 12 or 16 hours in a tractor all day. You're listening to the radio, but there really isn't a whole lot of other contact, going on. And that matters, right? So that sense of isolation, the sense of the rural culture as well, just, what would the neighbors say, right? If all of a sudden I'm getting treatment for a mental illness, what would the neighbors say? How will I be treated differently? All of these things all kind of crash together, and the impact is huge.
Yeah, that social stigma, I've been told a lot of times people in rural communities don't even like going into a clinic and being seen to need help. And we've heard that a number of times. It's just that social stigma, and also the self stigma, as you were talking about, having that true grit type approach to life. And as you were talking about, pulling up your bootstraps. And so we all need help sometimes. And I think that's the message, is that, we hear it a lot, but it's okay to not be okay, right?
It is, but whether or not that message is getting through, or that people are feel safe enough within their community to have their truck seen outside the therapist's office, right? Or else, should the psychiatrist happen to come to a rural community to do a one-day clinic at the hospital, and these sorts of things, right? Because people know what vehicle you drive, right? And the smaller the community, the more they know. People used to say to me, you can tell you're in a small community if I go upstairs in my house, turn off all the lights, pull down all the blinds. It's midnight. I think there's nobody around, and I sneeze. The next day, someone's going to ask me how my cold is.
No doubt. Definitely. All right. Well, I'm in a rural community in Medicine Hat. It's the first time I've lived in a very remote rural community, for sure. And even being new here, you get to know people so fast and quite well too. But I got to say, I love the supportive and amazing feel that I get in rural communities. I feel there is a sense of, people wanting to be supportive of each other. So hopefully we could hold some hope in that as well. Okay, so Do More Agricultural Foundation. Tell me about that. You're a new ED. Just tell me about the organization first.
Absolutely. So the Do More Agriculture Foundation was created in 2017, and it actually came out of a social media conversation. So one of our founding board members, Kim Keller, yet another farm suicide in their community, right? And that's another statistic that I probably should have mentioned when I talked about agriculture, but farmers have a 20 to 30% increased risk of suicide compared to the regular population. So there is a heightened number that happened that happen in farming communities, and so and it's a fact. So it should be openly shared. Anyway, Kim lives in a community that had yet another farm suicide, and she went online to share how she was feeling about that, and she framed it as we've got to do more. And that's really what touched it all off. So it was created first in 2017 by farmers in Western Canada to address this need. What they felt was sort of this gap that Do More wanted to shine light on the issue, because at that point there had been research and so on and so forth. But sometimes getting that research right down to the farm level, right? That's having people whose job it is to really do that work, that was important. It became a national charitable foundation in 2019, and received enough funding and donations by that point to have an executive director. The first executive director came on, then she stepped away, and the second executive director, Megs Reynolds, came in place in 2022 and was here until last summer. And then the board brought me on board in the fall of 2024. And so, yes, I am a Saskatchewan farmer, which perhaps it has good and bad. I'm not perhaps as connected out to Eastern Canada, although I have staff and board members in Eastern Canada. So I'm looking forward to growing our presence out east. What I do know, though, is that 40% of Canada's farmland is in Saskatchewan. And so whatever we do, whenever we're talking about the issues of mental health and agriculture, we want to make sure that what we say is landing in the rural and agricultural communities. And so having somebody who lives in, grew up in, still lives in, and actively farms, there's a measure of trust that's built into that does matter.
Yeah, 100%. Having that lived experience, right, of understanding what it's like to grow up on a farm and to see the circumstances. So no, I think you're the perfect person for the job. For sure.
I'm still here 5 months in, so the board must.
This is good. This is really good. So what are your big plans?
Well, first of all, I always say in the first 3 months is basically just don't drown, just make sure that you get a handle of what's happening. And we just recently on April 1st hired an operations and outreach manager, and she's fantastic. We're so pleased to have her on board. It allows, one of the things about an entity is that you can grow sort of really fast, but sometimes you need to pay attention to, some, things on the back end, just to make sure that everything's that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's and everything feels good on the back end, so that you can continue to do your mission, which is to support Canadian communities, to really open space for the conversation for mental health in agriculture. And so one of the things that I've noticed, and coming from my background as a writer and an editor, I'm a historian actually by profession, and I've written a lot on health history, including some mental health awareness pieces. One of the things that I know is that when we think about mental health, and Andrea, you can jump in at any point if you see this as well, but one of the things that I've noticed is that we tend to think, and we see on social media, mental health memes or social media posts that skew immediately to the individual level, things that we need to do as an individual to help our mental health, right? So it's things like, eat properly, drink water, move your body, do yoga, go for walks, if you feel like you need additional support, call a call line, reach out, go to therapy, these sorts of things. And these are all wonderful things. And they're all things that we absolutely need to do at the individual level. One of the things about Do More is to also activate communities, right? And that's been a significant focus for Do More right from the get-go, is to help communities to find ways and paths to make sure that they as a community is a good place for someone to walk that path towards recovery and healing. Mm-hmm. And there is a community level of responsibility. Because there's a community level of stigma that we know still exists, there's a community level of responsibility to talk about mental health, to create themselves and recreate themselves as a space where you are welcome, no matter where you're at on your mental health journey, that you are welcome and included, and that we are a space of hope and healing. And so helping communities to create spaces for those conversations and to identify with them and alongside them their own existing strengths and how they can activate those strengths in new and interesting ways to shape the conversation for mental health. That's where Do More is going, is to make sure that, yes, we are responsible and are as individuals, and to kind of continue that conversation, because you do need to kind of reach in and touch people's hearts, right? And to make sure that they feel that they are loved and appreciated and they are worthy of going and getting help. So that's absolutely a huge part of the conversation. We also want to make sure that we're activating community in ways that a community feels like they are also part of this conversation.
Yeah, 100%. And I definitely agree with the preventative education approach when it does come to, and as you do too, with the drink water, exercise, like that's the base stuff. And then definitely bringing that into a community mentality where we can all be supportive, and what can we do as a community? So what can people do as a community? And do you have any initiatives as well right now that people should know about?
Absolutely, we certainly do. So one of the things that Do More is most known for, and certainly most proud of, is our community fund. So this is supported by Farm Credit Canada, and it's renewed on an annual basis. And so communities can apply to us through the community fund to host a community level event for increased mental health literacy. And we have a list of 4 different seminars, let's call them seminars, or workshops, let's call them that a community can have. And so what we do is that we work with the community to identify which workshop would work best for their particular community. And the 4 workshops are our own Talk, Ask, Listen workshop, which really walks you through what it looks like to be a good supporter, and whether it's at the community level or at the individual level, and what that looks like within a farming community. So Talk, Ask, Listen. We also work closely with Ontario Farmer Wellness and the Canadian Centre for Agricultural Wellbeing, and they have In the Know, which is a similar 4-hour workshop that can be held at the community level, specifically focused on helping people to understand the issues of mental health and the challenges of mental health within an agricultural community. The third is Safe Talk. So that's a specific 4-hour workshop that is around suicide prevention and how to talk to someone about suicide. And the 4th workshop that our community fund can help a community to host is the mental health first aid. And that's a deeper workshop. It's about 4 hours of pre-work and then 8 hours of learning together with the facilitator. And so it's quite in depth. And yet, sometimes that's what the community is looking for. And we define community. It doesn't necessarily have to be a geographical community. It can be. So we've had a high number of agricultural societies apply to us. Sometimes they are crop or producer focused societies, such as an egg producers association or a regional farm association of some kind, also reach out to us and apply for funding through the community fund. And what the community fund is able to do is that it's sort of split into 2 pieces. So there's always cost for facilitation. And so do more, make sure, like through our community fund, we look after the facilitation costs. And then there's some costs that we can advance to the community. Well, usually they pay for it first and we reimburse them. But there's some funding if they need to rent a hall, if they need to, if they'd like to pay someone, of course, a 4-hour session, you know, that takes up a large chunk of the day. They want to make sure that people have some food, you know, throughout part of that day. And so we make sure that we have got some funding in place for that as well. And yeah, so Farm Credit Canada helps us host our community fund. And so this year, for whatever reason, we didn't receive the same number of applications this year as what we normally do. And so our application is actually still open, and we're taking it on an ongoing rolling basis. And then we can work with communities to set something up and have a community host, help them host a community level conversation. One of the other pieces that we've done at Do More this year is to create some additional supports for those community champions. So we held a couple of online workshops, just short 1-hour workshops, to work with community champions to talk about best practices in community. Because one of the things that Do More knows is that the minute you put the word mental health on there, people will self-select out, and they won't come and they won't sign up for that workshop. And so giving them some tips on how to overcome that and how to have those, if you can, those individual conversations and invitations to bring them in. Because what people assume is that they'll see the word mental health and they're like, I'm fine, I don't need that, I don't need to go to that workshop, because they think they sort of assume that it's about that individual level, how to help my own mental health, right? And sometimes people get that out of a workshop, but that isn't the goal of the workshop. The goal of the workshop is to have more people in a community who feel comfortable talking about mental health, who feel who create a space for that conversation.
Yeah. Well, that is a lot of information that's very valuable. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to share about our Rural Minds Matter campaign coming up in Northern BC. But first, do you have a message for people in farming communities that may be struggling right now?
If someone is struggling, finding a way to talk about it helps. So when Do More says talk, ask, listen, struggling alone is probably not going to get you where you want to be. And it's not going to get you on a path to healing as quickly as you deserve. The quicker you can get on that path, the better. And for those in community, if you yourself are doing well, the best thing that you can do for the people around you is to activate your curiosity. What can you do at the community level that would maybe help others? Do you have a library? Can you raise some funds to make sure that your library has a really robust section of books, you know, around mental health and mental illness that might help other people in your community? Do you have a community newsletter? Can you put in a blog post or some access to resources for mental health? Can you create a list of all the therapists and the doctors and everybody in your sort of region and create that list and post it online? It costs nothing. Off you go, and you might help somebody. So these are just a couple of, off the top of my head, things that you can do both at the personal level and at the community level to help those around you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Merle. It's been amazing talking to you today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so have a stay on, and I'll thank you in the back end of StreamYard. And just to finish up, everybody, just wanted to remind you at stigmafreementalhealth.com, if you go to our campaigns tab, you'll see that we have 2 campaigns running right now. The one that I want to draw your attention to is the Rural Minds Matter campaign, Leading Together with Resilience. Mike Shripnick is our strategic advisor, and in early May we'll be heading up to Northern BC, Prince George, Fort St. John, Prince Rupert, Terrace, etc. Those are the ones that stick in my head. And so everybody, please come and definitely check out the campaign, the town halls, and the great excitement. And we're very collaborative with Do More Ag, and we're super excited to be in partnership with you, Merle, and we really appreciate all your support.
We've been sending all of our ambassadors to your rural peer support training, and we shared it out, and we're happy to share it out again. We think it's amazing training. Thank you for leading it. It helps people to increase their level of confidence to reach out to one another. It's a great program.
Yeah. Yes. And as well, thanks for the reminder, Merle. May 5th and 6th, please come to Stigma-Free Mental Health. Look up the rural program, and then the peer support will be listed there very clearly for everybody. We do have a cohort taking place with Sarah Rial, who will be the trainers. As per usual, we really encourage people to take this peer support fundamentals training. So it's for beginners. You get a certificate. It is $50 a head. If you cannot afford that administration fee, then we definitely can help you out. We don't want to turn anybody away. We believe in health equity and accessibility. So thank you, everybody. Please have a wonderful day. Merle, where can people find you?
Merle at domore.ag if you want to send me an email. And of course, the Do More Agriculture Foundation has a website online as well.
Perfect.
And lots of socials.
Yes, lots of social and a very extensive social media network, I must say. Very impressive for sure. There's a lot of work put into that. So creating that community, that awareness, and together we can ignite understanding in rural communities and agricultural communities in embracing mental health. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. I appreciate you tuning in, and thank you so much, Merle.
Thanks for having me.